Braves fans are underrating what Grant Holmes can do in the rotation this year. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Tuesday, February 11th, your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And over on the Substack, we were writing about the rotation, the outlook for the rotation as you go into spring training. Yesterday's show, obviously, we talked about the big three: Chris Sale, Reynaldo López, Spencer Schwellenbach. Expectations, workload, all that kind of stuff. And today, I want to talk about the rest of the rotation, right? So we're going to get to who's the first man up in your sixth starter spot between Bryce and AJ Smith-Shawver. We're going to get to the return of Ian Anderson. But before we do that, I want to talk about Grant Holmes, because there's two groups of people when it comes to Grant Holmes for 2025, right? There are the people that think he's upper 20s, failed prospect who is, you're going to be lucky to get an ERA under 4.5 from him. And he's just not that, he's expendable and just an average dude. And then there's folks that think that Grant Holmes is significantly underrated and can be not only a fill-in starter for you early in the year, but potentially an impact starter. And I'm part of that second group. And from his public comments, so is Alex Anthopoulos. He said multiple times this offseason, they like Grant Holmes, they like his stuff, they're going to give him a chance to start. And the fact that he's out of options obviously means, barring some just collapse, he's going to make the opening day roster. But I legitimately think that Grant Holmes can be not just a fill-in starter. I think he can be a standard, legitimate, very good starter on this team. Let's talk about what he did last year, what he's projected to do this year, and why he's been as successful as he has in Atlanta after leaving the A's. And last year, 26 games for Grant Holmes. He started 7, 68 in the third innings. Really should have found a way to get 2 more outs somewhere, let's be honest. But 2-1, 3.56 ERA, 9.2 strikeouts per 9 innings, 2 walks per 9 innings. He was worth 1.1 WAR. And the projections this year are that Grant Holmes doubles up on the starts, 15 total starts, 45 total innings. Again, these are from Fangraphs, from the depth charts on Fangraphs. They have him at 6-5 with a 3.99 ERA in 114 innings. Strikeout rate coming down to 8.7 per 9. Walk rate ticking up to 2.94 per 9. And being worth just 1.2 WAR. So not quite double his innings, but an increase of 80% of the innings and an increase of 0.01 WAR. But I personally believe that Grant Holmes can outproduce that, because I don't think we realize exactly how good Grant Holmes was last year. So, yes, his ERA, 3.56. Little bit of an underperformance. The expected ERA was 3.46. But a lot of the inputs that went into Grant Holmes' performance last year weren't just good. They were elite. Okay? So, chase rate for Grant Holmes last year, 97th percentile in all of baseball, 35.1% chase. Whiff rate, 92nd percentile in all of baseball, 32.4%. Strikeout rate was really good. Walk rate, 5.3%, 90th percentile in all in baseball. He's throwing strikes. He's not throwing balls. Those strikes that he throws, people are swinging and missing at those. When he doesn't throw a strike, people are still swinging and missing at those. That is who Grant Holmes is. And despite having a ground ball rate just barely better than average, 58th percentile, 44%, he was still in the top quartile of barrel rate allowed in baseball, 6.7%. And it all comes down to one of the big adjustments Atlanta made with him when they got him as a minor league free agent. And as dumb as this sounds, they just gave him a slider. It's not a fancy slider. It's just a boring-ass regular slider. I don't know why the A's did not try to give Grant Holmes a slider. The first thing you do to a struggling right-handed pitcher who does not throw a slider is you give them a slider. Here. Now, a lot of this comes from Eno Sarris of The Athletic. He talked to Grant Holmes in Oakland last year when Atlanta was facing Oakland. And Holmes explained that they never really tried it. And I can understand the thought process behind not necessarily giving him a slider because he was a cutter guy. And what is a cutter except for a very firm slider, right? A fastball with sliderish movement is a cutter, right? Giving a guy who throws a cutter, giving him a slider, I understand why you would hesitate a little bit on that concept. But Atlanta's made it work, right? So the way that Grant Holmes' stuff works, okay? Four-seam fastball up in the zone. It's above average velocity. He averages 95 on it. He ticked up on the velocity when Atlanta put him in relief in the minors. He was sitting like 92, 93, 91, 92, maybe 93 as a starter. Atlanta put him in relief. His velocity ticked up, and a lot of that carried over to when he made spot starts and moved back to the rotation for Atlanta last year. But fastball up in the zone, the movement on that fastball, it's not exceptional, but it's good enough. A lot of locations up. And then everything works vertically off of that. Below the fastball is the cutter. He does get above average movement on the cutter. Fastball, below that is the cutter. Below that is the slider. Below that is the curveball. So it's a north to south kind of thing. And the advantage of north to south for a pitcher versus east-west is east-west is good at minimizing contact, right? You'll get the bat on the ball, but you're not going to get it on the barrel, right? You'll get it in on the hands. You'll get it off at the end of the bat. It'll be weak contact. A north-south game is very much missing bats, right? You have to have a decent four-seamer to make that work, but it's very much the goal here is to miss bats. And again, the four-seamer for Grant Holmes, 37% usage, very good. Whiff rates were fine, 20%, right? Fastballs typically don't have the best whiff rates unless you're just amazing with it. But the slider, positive run value, 41.5% whiff rate on the slider, which, if you're keeping track at home, is absurd, okay? Curveball, 43.7% whiff rate on the curveball. Absurd as well. The cutter, comparatively, isn't actually that good of a pitch, but it's a tendency breaker, okay? It's one of those, think about, you're watching fastball, okay? Fastball up in the zone. You're trying to be mindful of the slider dropping a bit or the curveball dropping a lot, right? And the thought process here for a lot of hitters in that situation is, I'm going to sit on the slider. It's the middle of the three, and it gives me the best opportunity to try to drop down on a curveball and get something on it, right? The cutter comes in, it's going to be above your bat, right? So he threw 8% cutters last year, okay? But it's a tendency breaker. When guys got a bat on it, it got crushed. 467 batting average, 867 slug on the cutter. He didn't register a single strikeout on the pitch. But it was used just enough to keep guys off of the other things. And again, I feel the need to keep saying this. The whiff rates, the chase rates on the slider and the curveball were some of the best in baseball. Yes, the four-seamer graded out well. He pounded the zone with it, almost 60% strikes. But he wasn't reliant on the fastball and velocity and things like that to beat hitters last year. It was the slider and the curveball playing off of that four-seamer. And because he wasn't reliant on the velocity, because he wasn't reliant on blowing the fastball by hitters, gives me reason to be confident that you add additional workload on Grant Holmes by, let's say he's starting for the first 2 months of the season or however long it takes for Strider to be ready, and then he's your sixth starter, your spot man, your long man, whatever. I have confidence that he'll be able to hold up for a 5 or 6 inning start. I have confidence he'll be able to hold up for the workload of a full season because he's not reliant on fastballs, which are the most prone to what fatigue can do for you, right? So I'm a believer in Grant Holmes. The projection, again, 3.99 ERA, 1.2 WAR. They have his walk rate ticking up almost a full walk per 9 innings. They have his strikeout rate ticking down half a strikeout per 9 innings. I think he's going to outproduce a lot of that. Personally, in fantasy baseball, I am trying to get shares of Grant Holmes. I am a believer in Grant Holmes this year. Choose not to be a believer in Grant Holmes at your own risk. But in just a minute, there are legitimate questions about what Ian Anderson can do this year as the other starter in the opening day rotation. We'll get to that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about the back half of Atlanta's rotation, right? We covered the top guys yesterday. We covered Chris Sale, Reynaldo López, Spencer Schwellenbach. Today, we're covering Grant Holmes, Ian Anderson, and the battle for your sixth spot. And Ian Anderson's in a really interesting situation because he was one of your better pitchers in 2021 in that World Series year. I've talked about this, I think, on the pod once or twice. I've written about it a few times. I was fortunate enough to be at Game 3 of the 2021 World Series, and I watched Ian Anderson take a no-hitter into the 5th inning. Through 5, I think, actually. Wasn't a perfect game. He had a couple walks to the point where I didn't even realize it was a no-hitter in the stands because, 1, it was raining on me and cold, but 2, because there had been so many base runners from, I think there was actually a hit by pitch and a couple walks in that game. But in 2021, 24 starts, a 3.58 ERA, 5th place finisher for Rookie of the Year, right? But he really cratered in 2022. 10-6, an ERA of 5 in 22 starts. Eventually went down to Gwinnett, ended up having Tommy John, and didn't make it back to the majors yet. Still hasn't done it, right? Came back last year, but was not selected to come up to the majors. And he's out of options. So you understand why they didn't call him up last year. If they called him up and he was bad, you couldn't send him back down. No, wait, technically I think that wasn't right. He was optioned down to start the year. So they could have called him up and then sent him back down. That's right. But either way, they didn't think he was ready. And the minor league numbers bear that out. 2024, 3-2 over 15 starts with a 3.44 ERA in 68 innings. Really should have pitched one more inning at some point in time in the minors last year. But just a situation where, coming back from Tommy John, there were enough questions about what he was able to do where when Atlanta had to win every single game, they were not counting on Ian Anderson to come up and do that. But again, he's out of options. And something I've talked about before, he was the number 3 overall pick out of high school in that 2016 draft. He's never logged a professional appearance out of the bullpen. Other than probably coming in on short rest in a tournament or something, he's probably never pitched in relief in his life. So you feel like it's probably more important to get him right, to get him in the rotation, simply because if you put him in the bullpen next year to start the year, you're asking him to do something he's probably literally never done. I know in professional baseball he's never done it. Maybe as a high schooler, once or twice, he came off the bench in short rest to pitch a couple innings in a championship game or something. But in his professional career, he's never pitched in relief. And the real issue you have to figure out, obviously, it's gonna be which Ian Anderson do you get? It's a 4-seam change-up profile. That's the majority of what he does. He has a curveball for his breaking ball. That is still a vertical game, not to the same extent as Grant Holmes, right? Using that changeup. Changeups run back to the arm side, so it's 4-seamer up. The changeup, his doesn't have a lot of drop, but it does run more to the arm side than the 4-seamer does. And then his curveball, it's not straight drop, but it's pretty vertical. So it's 4-seam, changeup off of that, which again is more of a weak contact thing than a swing and miss whenever you're working laterally like that, especially a changeup that doesn't have a lot of drop like his does. And then the curveball off of that. Now, I will say, when he was on in 2021, the 4-seamer graded out really well. The changeup graded out really well. The curveball didn't, but it was more of a tendency breaker. And he got a ton of ground balls, which a changeup guy should do that. 52.1%, 85th percentile that season. And then he got plenty of whiffs. Wasn't getting a ton of strikeouts. Was allowing, when guys got the ball, it was a barrel, right? He was 20th percentile in barrels, 9.5%. But he got a lot of ground balls, got a lot of whiffs, and was throwing with decent velo, right? Averaged 95 on the fastball. And when you tick over to 2022, in retrospect, you can see some of the precursors of the Tommy John, because the velocity was down and he wasn't spinning the ball as well, right? So the fastball came down from 95 to 94. He lost some movement. He lost a lot of drop on the curveball. The curveball was moving more like a slider than a curveball, I guess anecdotally on this. Graded out, it went from grading out minus one run value to -3. The changeup went from +5 to +3. The 4-seamer went from +13 run value to -4. Some of that was the velocity, but some of that was the locations as well. It lost a little bit of vert. Okay, it went from half an inch more vertical drop than average to it went from half an inch less vertical drop than average, which is good. You want less vertical drop on a 4-seamer, to half an inch more vertical drop than average. Now, when it did that, it added an inch of horizontal movement, but it still was below average on horizontal. So it went from above average induced vertical break to below average and still maintained the below average horizontal movement, right? That weird dead zone thing where it was getting 13, 14 inches of vert, but it was only getting 5.5 inches of horizontal movement, of arm side movement, that dead zone thing. And because of that, it ended up over the heart of the zone a lot more than he intended. And it got rocked, okay? They eventually sent him down. He ended up having Tommy John. In retrospect, some of the location stuff, some of the velocity stuff, anecdotally have all kind of been precursors to Tommy John. We just didn't know it at the time. And I do think that he's probably the wild card in the rotation to start the year. I have a lot more faith in Grant Holmes than I do in Ian Anderson, simply because Ian Anderson honestly didn't look that great in the minors last year. In Gwinnett, 10 starts, 3.96 ERA, 53 strikeouts and 52 in the third inning. So 1 strikeout per inning, but he walked 27. That's 4.6 per 9. That's worse than any of his major league seasons that he had with Atlanta. Even that really struggling 2022 year, he was only at 4.4 walks per 9. Now, control takes a while to come back after Tommy John, but it's still a little nerve-wracking here. This is the big wild card to me. Ian Anderson is either going to be your 5th starter, not your 4th, your 5th. I think Grant Holmes is your 4th. Or he's going to be the long man in the bullpen. Because if you don't put him on the roster, you could lose him. He's out of options. But what he does is going to influence if Bryce Elder or AJ Smith-Shawver make the opening day roster. And we'll break that down next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of the Tuesday show, Lindsay Crosby talking about the back half of the rotation for the Atlanta Braves to start 2025. The 6th starter does matter, right? The Braves used an extra starter a lot last year. The team has indicated they want to keep doing that. They feel like, this is a little bit anecdotal, but they feel like when they were doing that, they were not having the injuries to your guys like your Sale and your Lopez and things like that. And in the second half of the season, down the stretch, when they got rid of that 6th starter and just went with a 5-man rotation, that's when you saw Lopez hit the IL twice with inflammation, elbow and shoulder. That's when you saw Chris Sale go on the IL or miss the last start of the year with back spasms, being unavailable for the wild card, things like that. So this last starter does matter, right? Bryce Elder versus AJ Smith-Shawver. You're going to use a 6th starter. It's likely going to be one of these guys. And it's very interesting, kind of the discrepancy you have here, okay? Bryce Elder, all-star in 2023, looked good to start the season and then collapsed in the back half of 23 and then never figured it out in 24, okay? 10 starts, 6.52 ERA, and averaged less than 5 innings an outing. And the big thing here, when I go back and I look at this, he added a little bit of velo, right? He added like a mile an hour on the fast, on just about everything. But the big change when I go back and watched Bryce Elder this offseason is he lost some movement on his slider. And because of that, it regressed significantly in its performance, okay? In 2023, full season, 241 batting average allowed to lefties on the slider, 248 to righties. In 2024, lefties went from hitting 241 against it to hitting 336 against it. Like, it picked up 68 points, picked up almost 200 points of slug year over year. Lefties crushed that slider last year. Now, a little bit of that is small sample size, right? He made 10 starts. A little bit that's bad luck. The expected stats said the slider should have given up, said the additional slug should have been only 100 points, not 200 points. And when you look at it, like a little bit, like it gave up a little bit of drop with the extra velo, and it had a little bit more horizontal movement, but the horizontal movement was still a below average amount. And the drop was still an above average amount. And it mostly, to me, feels like it manifested in the locations. He left the slider hanging in the zone more often. I'm assuming that's because the little extra velo made it move a little bit differently than he expected. Again, a little bit less drop than he was expecting, a little bit more horizontal movement than he was expecting. And so a pitch you're aiming for, not up and in, but you're trying to like front hip a slider or something to a lefty, all of a sudden ends up, you're trying to backdoor slider to a lefty. It ends up a little more over the plate and a little higher than you wanted. Like, I get it. It's not ideal, but I get it. Let's see if we fix that. AJ Smith-Shawver could not be different from Bryce Elder. We've talked about him before. I'm a fan of AJ Smith-Shawver. He's the most athletic player in this system. The four-seamer can touch 100. Locations are sometimes a little iffy, especially on the four-seamer. And so because of that, he ends up not being as efficient as you would like. So he's not eating innings that well. And I do think if there's a situation where Atlanta has to take a guy from the major league roster and put him in the pen, AJ Smith-Shawver might end up being that guy because of the inefficiency that he has at times when his locations aren't as crisp. Some of this, obviously, not his fault. The organization messed with his slider shape so much last year, right? Going from that Spencer Strider-esque gyro slider, they tried to give him a sweeper, tried to move it back. It was a whole thing, right? Not entirely his fault, but still. Just really struggled with some of the shapes, and then he came up, made the start against the Cubs, like 4 1/3 scoreless, had the oblique injury. But when he came back down the stretch in Gwinnett, feels like he turned a corner, okay? Final 6 starts in AAA, all of them were 5 innings or more, okay? 2 of them were quality starts. Another one was 6 innings, but he allowed, I think he allowed 3 or 4 runs, so not a quality start. And one of them was a dominant 7-inning start against Nashville. That's the Brewers organization. 3 hits, 3 walks, 11 strikeouts, but he was tagged with 4 runs because he gave up a grand slam. He left a fastball out over the plate. I think it was an 0-1 fastball, and it got crushed by Wes Clark. Like it was like a single, got guys on, and then the mistake pitch. And outside of that, it was a dominant start, right? So if he can build off of that, I have some belief that AJ Smith-Shawver could be your 6th starter. And the big thing here, this is his 3rd and final option year. If he doesn't make the opening day roster, you have to pop that final option, which means you can move him up and down 4 or 5 times in 2025. But when 2026 rolls around, he has to stick in your rotation, or he has to go to your bullpen, or you have to risk losing him. It feels, I think the best case scenario here for Atlanta is that AJ Smith-Shawver is the 6th starter, and then someone moves to the pen when Spencer Strider's back. I don't know, is Ian Anderson going to be effective enough to not get moved? Is AJ Smith-Shawver going to be efficient enough to not get moved? Are they going to be concerned with Grant Holmes' workload and want to move him to minimize his innings? Again, 68 1/3 last year in the majors. So a reasonable jump for a reliever converting to startings around 130, 135 innings. That's what you saw Reynaldo López put up last year. That's a reasonable jump. Do they, unlike what they did with López, which he went in the IL, do they try to move, if AJ Smith-Shawver sticks or Strider comes up, whatever, do they try to move Holmes to the bullpen to save his innings, or do they just try to limit him to once every 6 days or once a week, use the built-in off days, keep him in the rotation the whole time? A lot of the public assumption is that Grant Holmes is the first guy to move back to the pen when Strider's back, and I don't know if that's true. I legitimately think he can be good enough, but either way, I'm noticing that I'm not nearly as worried as a lot of Braves fans about the back end of this rotation. I know I gave caveats on all of these guys. Yes. Every rotation has guys in the back end with caveats. And I do think, maybe with the exception of Bryce Elder, I do think Grant Holmes can be better than a fifth starter for you. I think that Ian Anderson has shown in the past when he's on that fastball is right. He can be better than a fifth starter for you. I think AJ Smith-Shawver has the stuff to be better than a fifth starter for you. And none of this includes the fact that you're going to get Spencer Strider back at some point in time next season. I feel good about the back half of the rotation, surprisingly. And I've made this point on the show before. If you're going to go out and get a starting pitcher at this point in the offseason, a day before pitchers and catchers report, it needs to be a guy that is a slam dunk, no doubt postseason starter. Because if you're just getting a guy to be in the back end of your rotation, you've got 4 guys who could be a number 5 starter. I think Holmes, Smith-Shawver maybe, could easily be an above average number 4 starter. And then again, Strider's going to come back sometime soon after the season starts. You don't need quantity of innings. You have a lot of options back here. I think if you add, it needs to be a quality starter who is a no doubt postseason guy, one of your top 3 that you would throw in October. This has been Brave Today for Tuesday, February 10th. We're back tomorrow talking bullpen. All right, we're going to get to the high leverage relievers on Wednesday. We're probably going to do the rest of the pen on Thursday. Yes, I do think they need to make an addition here. Yes, I do think it's probably going to be after pitchers and catchers report, so you can wait to move Joe Jimenez. And then special guest on Friday, member of the Braves beat, who will be coming to us from Northport talking about the vibes in camp. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you're listening on the audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop that next episode, and maybe also leave us a 5-star review because I really do love words of affirmation. Also, send your friends both to bravetoday.com, that's the newsletter, and to the YouTube channel. We're at just over 3,500 subscribers. I would love to get to 4,000 by opening day. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.